Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I want to thank you guys for coming out for this call meeting today. Hopefully we won't be here too long. Hold your time. So we'll begin by call to order and then begin to turn it over to Philip. See, the items are on there, as you can see, your handout. The business item and discussion today for a draft zoning ordinance. And so turn it over to Philip. We can begin.
Thank you, Mayor. I sent Terry to bring you copies of the actual documents. Ms. Stein has hers. She came in early and gotten hers. I didn't give it out to you in advance because I didn't want you reading it without having the benefit of what I was about to tell you. Because otherwise it's like reading a manual for an NFL football game.
It's like watching paint dry.
Right, yeah, it's really dry, boring stuff. So it's not, it will help you, and when he brings the copies, again, it'll help you follow through sort of what I'm talking about and why it works the way it does. So anyway, I just, as a preference, he'll be here with those shortly.
Okay.
So I'm just going to take just a few minutes to sort of give you some context as to what this is and why it's important. So you've heard me before probably talk about the plan, right? Our 2030 plan. It's our comprehensive plan. Any jurisdiction, city or county, that has zoning is required by state law to have a comprehensive plan. That plan is a high order plan, right? 25,000 feet. It gives general policy direction about how the town is to develop. It's not granular, which is a fancy way of saying it doesn't examine things on a parcel level. You don't go to somebody's property and say, oh, Miss Smith, that has to be residential. That's not the way the plan works. It's very generalized. It's meant to give sort of a general direction about certain things. Things like annexation, which areas ought to develop as commercial or industrial and that kind of stuff. But it's very important. And the reason why it's important is because when you make decisions that are dealing with zoning, if you don't follow the rules, you can be sued. And on one of the ways that you can be sued is that you made that decision arbitrarily. And so.
Can I get a clarification? When you say define you,
Council.
right, as a group.
As a group.
Right, not
Yes.
us as individuals.
No, not as individuals, as a group. So when someone comes with just by way of illustration, when somebody comes up and says, well, I want to rezone my property from X to Y. And I tell you, staff has given their recommendation, the planning board has given their recommendation, and y'all say, no, we don't want it. And it's justified, the decision to rezone is justified based on what the comprehensive plan says. You can turn it down, but you better have a decent reason why, and you have to articulate it. You got to state it for the record. If you just do it because you don't like the person or anything, I mean, it can't be unreasoned. It has to be justifiable. Otherwise, you'll get sued and you'll lose a lot of money. And so that's why the plan is important, because the plan gives you the big picture and the ordinance is just a tool, one tool you have to implement the vision of the plan, which leads me to my first graphic. So I just kind of wanted to give you a flavor of how the town and or in some other places, counties, cities, how they take shape, how they form. So again, the plan is the vision. It would be like you looking at a picture of a house, but you don't know how to build it. So you have to have tools to build a house. Well, all these things, and there are others, are available for the town to use to build the picture, to build a house, right? Annexation policy, where we annex or where we don't annex. Utility extension, where we run water and sewer or don't, or power. Zoning regulations, that's what we're talking about, how you use land for what purpose. Subdivision regulations, how you subdivide property, particularly for large subdivisions like Green Hill. Floodplain regulations, you can't build in a floodplain. Where are those floodplains? What can you do in a floodplain? Historic preservation controls, the town has chosen, and not everybody does, but the town has chosen a historic district. You can enlarge in the historic district or you can contract it if it's appropriate. Minimum housing regulations, that regulates what the outside condition of the house is. It's almost like a building code issue. It's like if it starts deteriorating, you can step in and do things. Nuisance regulations, that's how we control appearance, high grass, junk cars, all that kind of stuff. Unsafe buildings, when a building becomes dilapidated, we can tear it down. The other ways that we control how the town develops is what land do we own? Where City Hall goes, or fire stations go, or police station go, that defines the character of an area. Same thing with bikeways, parks, the industrial park. Transportation facilities also affect how a jurisdiction may look. Where airports, railroads, highways, canals, federal facilities, post office, courthouse, prisons, state office buildings, hospitals, jails, universities, county offices, schools, library, courthouse, all these decisions where stuff goes affects how the town looks and how the town feels. And so all of these things collectively, some of which you have power over, others you don't, add up to what makes the town look and feel the way it does. This zoning ordinance is perhaps one of the more powerful tools of this whole list, because because it controls what things get built where, and in some instances, how it looks, because it affects height, it affects setbacks, landscaping, those kinds of things. Okay, that's generally what I wanted to convey the role of the ordinance. And as I said, its principal function is to construct the vision that's identified in the plan. So let me hand out copies of the document. Oh, you already did? Oh, sorry. Okay. Would you change the next graphic? So this graphic highlights an important concept. So what you see here is from the comprehensive plan. That's the vision. And there's more detail in the plan that goes along with this picture. There's policies. Those policies help govern how we interpret making a recommendation when it comes to council. This map is the zoning map. This is where it actually, the rubber hits the road, because depending on what color you fall in, limits what you can do with the property, okay? So this is parcel specific. And it's important to know, as a matter of law, a zoning ordinance is both the document and the map. They're together. They function as one. Okay, it's not just one or the other, it's both. All right. The last time the town updated the ordinance, which many of you heard me make this song and dance before, was 1977. Right? I was 17 years old. I had a hair full of head of hair. And I was a lot skinnier. The way it's supposed to work is when you redo your comprehensive plan, which in this state probably is every 15 years, depending on if it's slow growth, faster if it's growing, or quicker if the town is growing faster. You should re-examine the ordinance and update it. Obviously, we didn't do that. What we did instead, for whatever reason, is we took that 1977 document and we added to it and subtracted from it just time and time and time again. So by the time I show up in 2020, I was handed a document that was unrecognizable in any form or substance of what the zoning ordinance should be or should look like. It was kind of a bastard child, quite frankly. So John Franklin, the town administrator at the time, asked me, I want you to fix all of this stuff. So that's what we proceeded to start doing. I rewrote the subdivision regulations. That had to be done first. We had to redo the comprehensive plan. We did that. This is the last big ticket item in that long list, of which some of which I've already updated, that really gets us past the finish line. And it works out pretty well, because I'm leaving at the end of the year, and hope with luck y'all will adopt this, and that will be in place. So what we've done, we took some elements out of the old plan. We didn't abandon the old zoning ordinance entirely. There are some key parts to it that we kept, but for the most part, we rewrote the whole thing. And we had to, because this required it. There are elements that are identified in here that were never really available to us in the old ordinance. So it really required a ground up approach to redoing everything. Now, I'm not going to go through every single nit and tattle in the book. We'd be here for days and nobody cares. But in the course of me talking, if you have specific questions about some little nuance that you care about, I'll be happy to tell you what the answer is. And then you will use tonight's commentary to sort of help you wade through the document or come up with questions, so that when we get to the public hearing at the next council meeting, you'll have the benefit of knowing what you're looking at, and then you can respond. Okay? All right. So we're going to go through this little memo that I handed out. And again, I'm not gonna just totally breeze through it, but I'm going to go kind of quick. some of which I think is particularly important, other maybe less so. So there are three major categories for which define how we change the ordinance, right? Legal, content, and process. Legal is pretty easy. The state law governs how these documents are to be prepared, what the elements are, what they can do, what they can't do, those kinds of things. Well, ours, while compliant, was barely compliant. And that was only after some shuffling that I had to do. All those amendments that we've done since I've been here, a lot of that stuff was done to try to make the thing workable until we got to the point of today. And that was the only purpose for doing it.
Is it the same rule that applies to most things with the state? You have to meet their requirement, and if you want it to be more than, you
Yes.
can take that stuff.
That's right.
Same thing?
That's right. State law is prescriptive. It tells you how to do it, what elements are in it, and what you can and cannot do. Ours was, as I said, written in 1977. Well, the laws have changed over those years. So there were a lot of things that we did that either were obsolete, redundant, or in some cases illegal. And so all of that had to get changed. And so that's in part what led to today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the legal part because it's a lot of sort of what's called inside baseball, just things that are sort of more legalistic than they are substantive in terms of discussion for policy. New vocabulary. There were things in the old ordinance that had certain titles and had to follow certain processes for approvals. That got cleaned up. Now, conditional uses and special exceptions, of which special exceptions used to come to council, that's no longer the case. They all go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. All you do from here on out are rezoning cases. That's it. Somebody comes up, says my property is X, I want Y, will you do it? You can say yay, nay, that's it. You don't need to know all the legalistic stuff that you used to, that some of those cases require. Those special uses are now called special use permits. They all go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Consistency with the comprehensive plan. That was not a requirement before, now it is under state law. So that's in part why we're doing this. Exceptions under state law. There are things that are called preemptions, things that you don't have any control over whatsoever. One perfect example are family care homes. So the state law says there are that you can control to an extent where family care homes can go, like adult. So individuals with mental health conditions that can live independently. You can have groups of these individuals in a household to live by themselves, up to 6 people. And you can control where they go up to a point. But then after that, you don't get a say at all. And so that would be one example where state law has prescribed or defined what you can and cannot do. You don't get to say, well, we don't want any at all. That doesn't work that way. Same thing with those internet cafe things. The state does not allow you to zone out and say, well, we don't want them at all. You can't do that. You just don't have that power. The state says you have to allow them. And you can restrict it, you can make it a little tough, but you can't say no to it altogether. That's another example of a preemption. Private agreements. This has to do with restrictive covenants. That's just a fancy term for when a developer puts their own rules in place for a subdivision. Before, it was not really described how to deal with it in the zoning ordinance. Now that's defined. Annexation. That's another thing the ordinance requires. Anytime somebody annexes, it automatically goes to agricultural residential as the zoning district. Automatic. Then they ask to get something else. They ask for something more if they want it. Whereas that just makes sure that we get a chance as the council to rezone property to what we think is appropriate rather than just giving it to them right off the bat. So it has to be a little bit more considered or thoughtful. Split zoning, that's just where you have a piece of property that has two zoning districts. That's bad planning. Every property should be its own zoning district. In other words, have its own zoning district, not split with two or three that doesn't follow a property line. That's just kind of one of those, again, inside baseball things. Better definitions. One of the key responsibilities that a zoning administrator has is being able to identify the use and making sure it complies with the ordinance. Sometimes you get into the weeds about what this is, what kind of use this is, and ours was poorly written for the most part. So we tightened all that up. So that makes Mr. Satterwhite's job a lot easier when somebody says, well, you're calling this a dentist office, and it's really not. It's I'm growing tulips here. Well, no, this is what it means. This is what a dentist office is. And so he can say, you can't have that. So content. This is probably the most important part. So the first couple of things really speak directly to what was identified in the comprehensive plan. So we created some new districts. The first one was a medical arts district. Another one was the Louisburg College District, and I'll talk a little bit about each one. The next one is a resource conservation district, and then the Plan Development District -R, and I'll explain why that's important. So the very first one, the medical arts district, is common. You find that in other locations. It's meant to create a hub, not exclusively, but it's meant to create a hub or a concentration of medical related uses in the general area that you place it. And the purpose behind that is because when I go to the doctor, I don't necessarily want to have to go to 4 different locations all over town to go get my medical care. You want to try to concentrate it to an extent. Now, it's not all, like I said, it's not all exclusive. It's not going to include pharmacies for everywhere, right? That's where CVS and all those other guys are. But what it does do is it helps where there's a main key activity, in our case, the hospital, that you have allied activities that are related to the medical field, doctor's offices, dentist offices, stuff like that, so that you don't have to go running around all over town. It's sort of concentrated. So that's what we did and identified here in the comprehensive plan where the hospital is in some areas in and around that. So that creates that district.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
But you leave out one of the major concentrations of medical offices in town, which is behind the, what is it, Best Western Days Inn. I mean, you've got, that whole area is almost all medical except for the daycare.
No, that is that whole area on the plan.
No, that's up by the hospital. This is down behind the Days Inn.
Like where the,
Oh, you're talking about, oh, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about down in here.
Right.
Well, yes. We could certainly add that to it. It's not, we chose when we did this, we sort of viewed that more as just office space, but you're right. I mean, it is functionally, it does surface as, or does exist as another hub, and we can certainly, if they want to, rezone it to that. We don't have to, because the office district that is in that area, the office zoning classification is sufficient for their use, but we could certainly do it.
Would allow that.
Yes. So there it in fairness, but your point's well taken. We could rezone it for that purpose, but what we're trying to do is encourage the concentration here rather than disparate locations. Although the zoning that those folks have allows them to exist and expand if they wanted it. But that's a good point. We can certainly do that.
so my question is, living in that district, of course, I have a residential home.
Mhm.
Does that put me at risk
Nope.
at all
Nope.
for expansion, say, of the hospital or
Nope.
whatnot?
It simply allows, it allows all the uses that are there already. But if somebody wants to sell their house or make their house into an office building, it just makes that process easier for that purpose. So what it's attempting to do is incentivize so that over time, which is normally how things get accomplished, it creates an environment where you can do that.
Does that include all of Jolly Street? I can't tell from here.
Yeah, right.
So it includes all the residential housing.
Yep, yep. But it doesn't undermine, if they want to keep the house and they want to sell it to somebody as a house, that's totally fine. It doesn't stop them.
Jolly Street is like the southern border of it. So the side with the doctor's offices, except for the dentist office, I guess, is blue in the residential side.
Yeah. The same thing, the same idea was done with the college in mind. It's very common where you have a college or a university, you create what's called a university district. It basically sets up a zoning classification that allows the college to do things without having to go through a lot of permissions and requests. Historically, the old ordinance was pretty restrictive. It kind of put the screws to Louisburg College, and we took the opposite direction. We sort of made it a little bit easier for the school in terms of signage and landscaping, and if they want to do certain other kind of activities, they don't have to go through a lot of hoops in order to do it. It's an asset. We want to try to preserve it as best we can, so we tried to create something that would allow them to flourish a little bit more.
That brings up something else I just saw 25 minutes ago. I was riding my bike down around the college, and the little road that goes down to the ball fields.
Mm-hmm.
There's 4 houses going in up there.
Yep.
Isn't that college property along there?
Nope. The only college property is the mobile home down at the end on the left. On the left, that's it.
So that strip of land between
College.
Noble and whatever that street going down to the ballparks.
That's college as it wraps down there. That's an extension of college that goes back in there.
Okay, so between College and Noble,
Mhm.
there's a strip of undeveloped land.
Yes, that is all residential.
I
That's
thought
not college property.
Doesn't belong to the college.
Mm-mm.
Right.
Now, at the very back where the ball fields are, that's all that is.
And then the college owns the land between the ballpark and the river.
Right.
So is all that area going to be included in that district?
Not necessarily. One of the key things, so I'm going to kind of take a tangent here real quick. So one of the key things in terms of implementing this as we move forward, the town has the unilateral power to rezone property without permission. If the town council said, Mr. Stover, we're going to rezone your property to commercial. And whether you like it or not, we're doing it. Y'all have that power. That's not the way to go about doing this. A lot of places do that. When they're doing town-wide rezonings, the county just did it not too long ago. They do it all the time. It's very common practice. That because we're such a small place, it doesn't make sense to do that. What you want to do is invite people, these areas that you want to rezone to these new districts, you invite them to rezone themselves, to initiate the rezoning themselves so that they buy into it and they're okay with it. So that when you have a hearing for that process, it's not packed to the gills with people yelling at you. They're actually wanting to do this.
They're not strong or arming the community.
You're not trying to muscle it. You're trying to sell them that this is helping you. And 9 times out of 10, that is in fact what it is. You were going to say something? Okay. So anyway, so the Louisburg College District, like I said, is meant to sort of help out the college. They had issues in the past with our ordinance, signage and some other little things that were creating problems for what they wanted to accomplish. And so I met with Dr. Brown to try to clean some of that up, to make it a little bit easier on them. Because I think previously, like I said, the town was being too aggressive with them in terms of what they were trying to tighten it down, and it just didn't make sense. So.
What about Van Scramble? Is that in order?
No, I think they're too far out. They're on this side of the road, so they're out. The resource conservation is a new district, and it primarily is along the river that you see here. So there'll be areas in here that, and that you can see what doesn't show up on here. It should, but it doesn't. Anyway, it's meant basically for floodplain, the areas that are close to the river that you don't want a lot of development in. You want to kind of keep it low activity,
Keep the
not
buffer.
yeah,
Tree.
buffer along the right, keep the vegetation because there's state rules about buffering the river in itself. So all of that gets played into, and so you want to rezone, and most of that land, again, either we control or there's one or two other groups that control it that will invite to rezone that property.
That just came up today too.
Mm-hmm.
The land between Seaboard and the river,
Yep.
okay? The EDC and several of us are interested in making that into a park, basically, or a green. Now, Will Hinton went and talked to Sean, and it was shown this development map for that area that
Yep.
I didn't know existed.
Yep.
I mean, to
Actually,
me,
you
that's
do.
all.
You came to my office and I showed it one
Yeah.
to you one time, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
It's
did.
been hiding in his office.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, isn't that all floodplain down in there?
Not all of it. A lot of it is. A lot of it
And, you know,
is.
the other thing is floodplains are going to rapidly expand.
Well,
I
so
mean,
there's
just talk to the people out in the western part of the
right.
state.
So there's a couple of things. So this resource conservation district, it's meant to keep development at a certain level. You don't want to, the same kind of development that you have in the middle of town or out here in these residential areas, you don't necessarily want along the river. But it doesn't mean that you can't develop at all. You can develop in a floodplain. We did it all the time in South Carolina. You just have to do it more thoughtfully. And it has to, you meet certain regulations. The idea of parks and greenways and all those kind of natural, all those kind of features that are appropriate for natural areas, you can do all of that. But it's meant to keep things like gas stations, the concrete plant, all that kind of stuff out of there. So the topography around the river goes up quite a bit. So obviously there are some areas that when the river's high, it floods. You're right, it's in a floodplain. There are other areas though are not necessarily, they're close to the river, but they're high enough to where it doesn't flood. And that you could do something with
Right
that.
now it doesn't.
Yes, well,
And like you said, you
I
can
would
still
submit
do
it
stuff.
probably.
You would just, of course, want to consult with people that know about wetlands and the geology and stuff. But I think, as Will Hinton had said, it was like thinning out the crowns of the trees. You would want to leave like the bigger, older growth trees in, but
He's
more
talking
the
about
weedy
the
stuff
views.
you could take
Yeah.
out. And similar to how Riverbend Park is, how I'd expect. You still need the trees to
Right.
act as the buffer and absorb the water, but it doesn't mean you can't
you don't want
do
to jungle.
nothing. You could have like a little walking trail,
Right.
some picnic tables,
Yeah,
something
that's
like that. Yeah.
What that plan that he has, that's showing almost,
Well, you can, some
urban
of that.
development.
Yeah,
That was a moonshot plan from a few years
yeah,
ago.
I mean,
just
that,
to
it was, but
get
it
people
didn't.
thinking about what was possible.
It is, some of those areas as it fronts Seaboard, so the river's here, Seaboard's, some of that is out of the floodplain entirely and is appropriate for urban style development, but not necessarily as you penetrate closer to the river,
Yeah.
which is what you're talking about, some of that area, which is where there is a greenway and actually kind of a natural performing arts thing that we had talked about. But again, Kim's right. That graphic I had prepared simply as a discussion tool, a rendering of what could be, but not necessarily exact what would be. That's all. The last one, the plan development R. So you've heard me say multiple times that we created a new zoning district a couple of years ago called the Plan Development District, right? It basically is a make up your own zoning district. And the reason why we needed it is because the typical style development that you're now seeing are mixed use developments, like North Hills Mall area, right? Residential, commercial, it's all mixed in. You have all kinds of activities of different types. We did not have a zoning category for that. If they had come here before we did that, it's like, sorry, SOL, you're out of luck. So that's why we created that. Now, the problem is that what we really also need, in addition to that, is a district similar to it, but is primarily focused on residential development. So you allow a variety of residential types, single family, what's called a one-family home or a two-family home, townhouses, or in some cases, multifamily. So that you can allow those kinds of developments, which may include a school, child care facility or something like that, without having to go through a lot of extra steps in order to get some of those uses approved. You don't want to necessarily use that PDD because that's really a multi-use zoning classification. Whereas the PUDR that we created is meant for just residential, okay? It's kind of fine tuning. You're trying to provide an option for developers that they don't have to go around their elbow to get something they want that fulfills a development purpose, okay?
Is that what Louisburg Falls would have fallen in?
No, Louisburg Falls was a classic PDD alternative where it was multi-use. It had, in fact, commercial, residential, light industrial, and institutional. So it was a true multi-use project that was, in fact, an appropriate, the appropriate use for that planned development district, which is what it's for. Now, I'm probably opening up a can of worms, but I'm going to say it anyway. So the Judicial Center. The Judicial Center, we are seeking to rezone to a PDD. It's not a multi-use project. It's a single-use project, right? It's government. But we had to use it because that was the only tool we had to solve the problems, the design problems that the county presented to us with the site. That was the only tool we had available to make that work the way they pitched it. So that's why we had to use it the way we did, because of parking and landscaping and some other issues. So anyway, just that was an aside. All right. We also created some, and cleaned up is maybe a better word. So the SHOD, what used to be called the SHOD is now called the Gateway Overlay. I'll talk about that. The Historic Preservation Overlay District, I'll explain what that is. And then the Watershed District, which is another overlay district. Okay, so let's do with the SHOD. An overlay district is like a layer cake. The first layer is the underlining zoning of the property, right? The base zoning, agricultural, residential, R1, which is low density residential. Then on top of that zoning is an overlay zone. The overlay zone is simply a tool that you can either expand or reduce the uses that is allowed in the underlining zoning district. That's why they call it an overlay. It sits on top of. Well, the SHOD was an example of this. Years ago, when it was done, there were multiple zoning districts in this area. There was AR, B2, and office institutional. So then they ran out there and they found this thing, the SHOD, and they passed it. And they stuck it on top of those three zoning districts in this area. Well, that overlay was horrendous. I know Lucy Allen will probably beat me up, but anyway, doesn't matter. The point of the story is it added an enormous layer of twists and turns and complications, both legal and procedural, to really achieve a fairly simple goal. And so we decided we had to keep it, or some facsimile of it, because of what's already been built out there. But for the most part, we gutted a lot of it and got rid of the part that was really not productive and useful, and kept the rest of it, enhanced it a little bit, and now call it more appropriately the Gateway District, the Gateway Overlay. And the reason why it's important is because, as the name implies now, it's the gateway into the town. So the kinds of things that are appropriate and the way they should be addressed are now more appropriate for what happens when you want to enter into the town. You want it, pleasing to the eye, you want quality development. So all of those kinds of things now are more easily achieved with proposals when somebody comes in the door versus what we had to go through before, when we were dealing with something. Which is why, by the way, when Louisburg Falls came, it was originally in the SHOD, and they wanted to rezone it to that PDD because the SHOD was just impossible to accomplish anything with. So that's one of the reasons why they went to it, among others.
So that's the Walmart
Yep, yep.
and the area, okay,
Basically, all that whole Walmart area and all of this, as well as the land on either side. This is an older map. There's a little piece of AR in here that we rezoned a while back. Miss Benning, she has her that B&B is right here. But the county's property, right, that they own out here, that's there. That's in our control too.
Okay, that is where they would probably, is that where they have said would be possibly second site for a judicial
Yes,
complex?
sir. Sure would. It would be under our control.
so could we basically zone it so they couldn't do it?
You could do that. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could.
Well, I mean, could that be a bargaining chip?
I'm not gonna get into the legality of that.
Well, isn't that part of what this all is?
Well, yes, I mean, if you want to get down to brass tacks, yes. You could basically say, if you don't play ball, we're going to prohibit. You could.
We would just need to consider what that means for future working relationships.
Right,
with-
right. I mean,
You could do it.
You can do
but
it.
Well, without- Okay.
Especially with our current county board
I play
composition.
hardball when they.
well, I'm not, my job is to explain this. You want to take, that, what you're talking about is politics. I'm not going there. That's what you get hired for. All right,
A discussion for another.
that's right.
Yeah.
You talk to your colleagues about that. All right, so the next one is a cleanup thing. This was the historic preservation overlay. So years ago, the town adopted a historic district. There was nothing wrong with it. It should have been included with the zoning ordinance, but that's not the way it was done. It alluded to the zoning ordinance as the tool to implement the historic district, but it's legally not very clean. It probably would have withstood legal challenge, but it's not normally how it's done. What's normally the way to do it is you include it in the zoning ordinance as an overlay, just like this is. And that just keeps it clean. So we cleaned all of that up. It's just a housekeeping thing. That's really all it is. Doesn't change anything, just keeps it legal.
So you did not change the boundary?
Nope.
All right. Would this be a time to consider that?
No, that's, the two are totally independent. All we did was clean up the legality of it. If you wanted to undertake revisiting the boundary of it, that's a whole different kettle of fish that requires a separate discussion.
You're making it easier for
Yes.
when they choose to do.
Right. You can revisit the boundary of the district anytime.
Well, I'll piggyback on what he's saying. My question is regarding the boundaries of the historic district.
Yes,
And they're
ma'am.
saying that we can have a discussion regarding changing it. Would that be in our best interest in just say to encompass part of downtown into that
You could.
so that we could protect or have say
Yep.
versus not having any say now?
So let's be clear about what it is you're getting if you did that.
Okay.
So there is a process to do that. And it's just a matter of steps. You have to undergo a historic survey. You have to have all this documentation. It goes to the state. They bless it, comes back to y'all. Y'all vote on it. Yay, you get it. Okay. Procedurally, it's not complicated. Takes a little time, a little money. What you get out of the historic district is not use. You do not control the use of the property. That's the zoning. You still have control over that. All you're getting with it is control of the exterior of the building. That's it.
And demolition.
And demolition, yes. The historic or the overlay district gives you the power to stop demolition if it is a historic property, and you can, but I would caution you need to be careful when you start doing that. Not that you can't, you just need to be on solid legal ground when you do it, because you'll get in trouble really fast. Because what you're doing, I want you to think about this. all these laws and ordinances and control, they're all infringe to some extent on property rights. And unlike the West, property rights in the South, particularly, are tightly held by the individual property owner. The General Assembly purposely does that. And so when you start cutting into that, they get testy. And so, yes, you can stop it. You can, I mean, you have a lot of power, but you just need to make sure that if you did, you're on solid ground when you do it. That's all.
Also, you don't automatically get it, like the survey, you have to show that there's a certain amount of historic, when I say participating, but that's not the term.
Contributing, you're thinking of
Contributing.
contributing. So, all right, that's partly true. So when you do, if you were going to expand the district to include the downtown area, so you're right, part of the buildings have to have some historic significance and or architectural significance, right? It's not just one, you can do it one or the other. So if George Washington slept here, great, but maybe he didn't. If it has all these cool architectural features that are thematic of the 1800s, okay, that's justification for saving it or for including it in the district. It's contributing in that way. Yes, you can do that. There are other ways of doing it. You don't have to use the historic preservation ordinance as a tool for that. You can independently adopt commercial design guidelines for commercial property, separate from the historic district. That's also capable. You can't do it for residential, but you can do it for commercial. You can create a design district, right, that you can control the exterior appearance of commercial buildings. That's just another tool that we've never availed ourselves of, but you could.
Can you prevent demolition under that?
Yes, you certainly can. That would be possible too.
My concern is fast forward 20 years.
Right,
The county needs to grow again,
right.
and now they take the rest of the block. I
Yep,
mean,
yep.
something was where the new annexation is now.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're losing part of a building on Nash Street.
Yep.
Fast forward another 20 years,
Right.
what are we gonna lose
Right.
next? And at some
Yeah, I
point.
mean, you could make a case to say, okay, the buildings that are left in that block,
Mhm.
they could say, well, we're gonna buy all of this and we're gonna tear it all down. So you're in the exact same boat you are with the theater, right? They bought it, it's theirs, they're tearing it down, there you go.
In the same way with any of the buildings along Nash Street,
Yep.
if I was a developer
Yep,
and say, well, I want the old tax office, I want this
Yep.
entire,
I'm gonna build a parking garage.
I'm gonna,
Yep.
yeah.
Sure could, sure could.
What about South Main Street?
Same thing. Well, in South Main, you could in fact create a historic district for South Main, but again, you have to go through all those steps. All the survey work and all this, and then y'all would have to vote on it. There'd be a public hearing and all this other stuff. So there's again, it's a process, and you need to get public buy-in because remember what this, both commercial property owners and residential property owners, you're controlling what they can do with their property. So they're going to be kind of like, okay, you're telling me I got to do this? Yeah,
They wouldn't see it as that.
well, they would see it differently.
No, that's what I was
Okay,
thinking,
yeah.
that now there's a new set of rules that
Right.
go along with.
That's right.
with your windows
Now,
or your.
I will tell you, interestingly enough, and I know I'm diverting a little bit, but so in the historic district, the historic commission has chosen not to control color. That's their choice. They could if they wanted to. We could, if Dr. Stover says, well, I'm going to paint my house pink, we said, no, you're not painting it pink. You're going to paint it green or one of these 12 colors that are found in the district. They could do that. So, okay, enough of that. All right, let's go to the last one, the watershed district. So the state of North Carolina has divided the state into watersheds. These watersheds have rules about the transferring of water from one to another. There's a lot of rules about both groundwater and surface water and the impact of land development on those watersheds. That is, when you have development and it rains and there's a lot of hardscape, the water runs off very quickly into streams and or rivers. You often pick up particulate matter or pollutants as that rain hits the ground and goes off. and dumps into those streams. They're very touchy about all that. So they make us, those jurisdictions that are in a water supply district, have rules for that. It's all state driven. It's not town driven. So we have to create the legal tool in order to implement that. That's what we have in these areas up in here are overlay districts that deal with a critical area and what's called a protected area. Most of it is like up in here. And so that's just another element that's in the zoning ordinance. It was in the old ordinance. It was not done perhaps in the best format. This just, again, another housekeeping thing. It doesn't really change any of the rules, doesn't do anything special, just cleans it up.
Well, that brings up one of my pet peeves, and that's the amount of parking spaces that we have required in the past.
I can speak to that. So when I got here, I agreed with you. That was done intentionally to limit development, because the more parking spaces you require, the harder it is to redevelop or develop property. So I had amended the ordinance when I first came here and reduced the number of parking spaces required for development. Those changes were incorporated into the new one. So this is much less onerous than the way it was originally.
Does this also address the issue of non-permeable and permeable surfaces for parking?
Only for, not for parking, no. There is a, you can use impervious surface area as a governing tool for developing a piece of property. That's just, in my judgment, that's overdoing it. I tend to prefer the use of setbacks, which is the distance that you have to set back from your property line to build something. So if you do your setbacks properly, you limit the footprint that the piece of property can be developed. It basically has the same effect as what you're talking about. When you start using this tool that Dr. Stover is talking about, using these ratios and mathematical formulas for impervious surface area, it just complicates it more than it needs to be. It's overkill in my judgment. Now, I will tell you that does come into play with this watershed stuff. If you build in this watershed area, there are rules specific to that limit you. And that's, again, state driven. Okay. So that gets us to permitted uses and permitted uses with standards. So I'm going to get into the weeds just a little bit, but I promise I'm not going to drown you. So the zoning ordinance typically has 3 categories when you come to see me. Kim comes to my office and says, Philip, I have a piece of land. I want to build a house on it. Great. What's the property zone? R1, residential. She brings me a plot plan. This is where the house is going. This is where the garage is going. I look at it, meets the setbacks. Great. I issue you a permit out the door. 10 minutes. Off you go. There's another situation where Chris comes in and says, I want to build a child care facility. I have some land. It's next to the church. I've had this land in the family, and I think it'd be a great idea to do this. It's like, okay, what's the property zoned as? Commercial. Well, I look at the rules. Well, the child care use is not permitted. It's called permitted with special conditions. And all that really means is that, yes, a child care facility is allowed in this zoning district, but you just don't get it automatically. You have to meet these conditions first. You have to have so much square feet for the playground. You got to have so many feet from another child care facility. And I'm just making this up to illustrate a point. There are conditions. You have to have street lights in the backyard, right, to light up the area. You have to have, some other outdoor bathroom or something. The point of it is that you can get it, but it's more than just you showing up, giving me a little site plan and getting the permit. You have to prove to me that you can meet all of these conditions. That's something new. We didn't used to have that. Before, you had to go to a board, zoning adjustment, planning board, council. That's ridiculous. Nobody does that. all you're doing is just making life hard on people. When it's something as simple as that, you should be able to say, you meet these requirements, get your permit, get out the door. So that's the second category. Permitted uses, and then permitted uses with what's called standards or conditions. The last one is the tougher one, special use permits. Dr. Stover comes in, says, look, I bought this old house. A client of mine died. I didn't do it. He willed me the house. And I'm going to turn this into an aromatherapy clinic. And I said, well, Dr. Stover, how is this property zoned? Well, it's residential, but I should be able to do this. Or it's at a corner. It's at an intersection, right? It's on Bickett Boulevard and this other street. There's a lot of traffic. You're not going to have anybody wanting to live there anyway. So it's like, well, how do I do this? Well, you look at the ordinance, lo and behold, he can do that. He can put a clinic or an aromatherapy office at that location, even though it's zoned residential, but he needs special permission from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So he's got to go before a board that's appointed by y'all to get permission to get this special use permit. So Bill shows up, tells him the sad story.